Welcome back to the MOOC course titled Qualitative Research Methods. My name is Aradhana Malik and I'm helping you with this course. And we have been talking about grounded theory. We discussed grounded theory in the last class. Today we will continue with that discussion and we will finish off the discussion on grounded theory. So we were talking about how we do grounded theory, how we conduct grounded theory research, and we started with data collection. Now we will talk about coding. So we've collected large volumes of data. What do we do? Coding is a process that helps to define and categorize data. So these codes emerge out of data. We take the data and we compare different aspects of the data, and we draw categories around the data, and we give them names. So we categorize, we see the data that has similar characteristics, we put it in clusters. We'll talk about this when we talk about methods. And so we put it in groups, and then we give a name to the group that describes most of the characteristics of most of its members, and that is how we code the data. These codes emerge out of the data, and I told you this in the previous lecture, that in quantitative techniques codes are predetermined and we find data that fits into these predetermined categories. But here, because it's exploratory research, we don't know what we are going to find, so we collect whatever we can and then we draw boundaries around similar things or similar data points, and then we say, okay, these are the characteristics that establish this similarity. And then we make codes, we give the codes evolve out of the data. Some types of coding techniques. The first method of coding is line by line coding. We examine each line of data and then define actions or events within it. And these actions or events are defined through sensitizing concepts. So sensitizing concepts are those background ideas that inform the overall research problem. Sensitizing concepts are the ideas that give a direction to the research problem. Sensitizing concepts offer ways of seeing, organizing and understanding the experience. There's a large volume of data. What is it that we are looking for? That is the sensitizing concept. What is it? Am I looking for trauma? When we talk about, say, let's take the example of the earthquake. What am I looking for? I'm looking for trauma. I'm looking for families. I'm looking for recovery. I'm looking for communication. How did the message go through? So these are the sensitizing concepts. They offer ways of seeing, organizing and understanding experience. They provide starting points for building analysis, not ending points for evading it. So if I say I'm looking for trauma, I pick incidents. We'll talk about significant incidents when we talk about axial coding. But so incidents are picked up, and then we say, okay, trauma means this, trauma means this, trauma means this. So they provide starting points. I'm looking for trauma. I go through mountains of data and I pick everything that gives me an indication of trauma. So, or then we categorize trauma into physical trauma and emotional trauma and psychological trauma. So I'm looking for 3 strains of trauma. I may get other things also, but I'm just telling you, we go with some idea, some direction in our minds as to what it is that we are looking for. Then sensitizing concepts should be used only as points of departure from which to study the data. My discussion doesn't end at trauma. Trauma gives me a direction. When we say earthquake, maybe I want to find out about trauma. I also want to find out about recovery from that trauma, maybe, in order to understand that experience fully. So it gives us a point of departure. Then line by line coding keeps us thinking about what meanings we make of our data, asking ourselves questions of it, and pointing out gaps and leads in it to focus on during subsequent data collection. So we line by line coding gives us something to work on. It gives us, it helps us point gaps in the interpretation, and it helps us focus on what we need to do next in order to complete our data collection. Dimensionalizing and axial coding, dividing properties into dimensions that lie along a continuum. Develop a dimensional profile of the properties of a category. So we divide the properties of the data that we have collected on and put them on a continuum, and then we develop a dimensional profile, we develop a definition, we develop a structure of the category, and then we say, okay, these are the properties of that category, and then we go in for axial coding, which is reassembling data in order to facilitate the making of connections between a category and its subcategories. So we reassemble the data, we take the data in its natural form, then we reassemble the data and we try to make connections between the category and its subcategories. So we try and see how these categories and subcategories connect, and we try and establish those connections, we try and explain those connections. This includes conditions that give rise to the category, its context. So we try and understand where are these categories coming from, what is giving rise to these categories, where are they situated, the context, the social interactions through which it is handled, and its consequences. What is the category doing to the phenomenon? Consequences means we have drawn boundaries around a category. We say, okay, these are the similar characteristics of these aspects of the phenomenon. How do they fit into the main phenomenon? How do they interact with the main phenomenon? Are they a part? Is this category really a part of the phenomenon, or are we trying to create something that's not a part of the phenomenon? So we try and understand how these categories came to be and how they are interacting with the phenomenon under study. Selective or focused coding uses initial codes that reappear frequently to sort large amounts of data. So we start with initial codes. The codes don't come out of the data. We start with some initial codes, and then those codes help other future codes evolve. And when we go through large amounts of data, some initial codes appear and we say, okay, this is the direction it's going in. So using that direction, then we filter out things that don't fit into that direction or that are not even remotely connected to that direction, and we let that direction evolve as it goes along because the volume of data is so large. For example, significant events. That could be a category, that could be a focused code. So in the earthquake that happened in Indonesia a few days ago, what were the significant events? A significant event stands out in the memory because it already has boundaries. The code already has boundaries. The earth shook at this time, so we are restricting our collection of data to that time. What happened? The building fell down. So many people were buried under the rubble. People felt pain. It's not the entire feeling. Physical injury, emotional hurt, feeling of being lost. So significant events, what happened around that event? And it stands out in the memory because it has boundaries, it has intensity, and it has emotional force. The emotional reverberations of a single event echo through the present and future, and therefore, however subtly, shade our thoughts. We are talking about an earthquake, and we are talking about the time at which the earthquake took place and events that followed after it. So significant events. What were you doing when the earth shook? I was standing under a tree. What happened? Because I was standing under a tree, I was saved, but I saw a building fall down in front of me. I did not get hurt, but I saw other people getting hurt. That kind of a thing. So it's a significant event. So you going to the tree would also become, why were you standing under the tree? That would also become a significant event because it has led to you being saved. you were going to go into that building, but before you entered that building that fell down during the earthquake, you were saved because you were standing under a tree. So even that becomes a significant event. So these kinds of things, you know, this is selective or focused coding. So we are picking significant events, not the entire earthquake experience, what happened before, during and after the earthquake, and events, things that people experienced, people who got hurt experienced, things that people who did not get hurt experienced, things that people who saw others get hurt experienced, etc. The conditional matrix is an analytic diagram that maps the range and conditions and consequences related to the phenomenon or category. It's a series of circles in which the outer rings represent those conditions most distant from actions and interactions, and the inner rings represent those closest to the actions and interactions. I have requested for permission for showing you what a conditional matrix looks like. If I get that permission, I will put it up in the notes along with these slides. So you'll see it physically what this looks like. Researchers create matrices to sensitize themselves to the range of conditions conceivably affecting the phenomena of interest and to the range of hypothetical consequences. So this is a physical, visual representation of the phenomena and everything affecting it and everything connected to it. So after coding, then we come to the comparative method. Once we have created these codes and categories and we have drawn boundaries around data, then we take these categories and we compare them with each other. So the comparative method is then used. Comparative method could include comparing different people, comparing data from the same individuals with themselves at different points in time, comparing incident with incident, comparing data with category, comparing a category with other categories, etc. So that is the next stage. We take categories and we compare them. Then what do? Then we start writing memos. We write down what we saw, what we observed, the data we collected, the categories that were made, and what we have understood. What does this do? This helps to spark the researchers' thinking and encourages the researchers to look at their data and codes in new ways. So just writing about something will stimulate our thinking and will help us question things that we are not so clear about. We may think that we know something very clearly, but once we write it down, reproduction, representation always helps you get feedback. Listening to oneself, writing things down, reading what one has written sparks off another round of thinking. It also helps to define leads for collecting data, both for further initial coding and later theoretical sampling. So memo writing helps to define leads. It gives us directions. It gives us links. You know, we are writing about something, whatever we tend to focus on more becomes the point of interest. Then it helps to elaborate processes, assumptions and actions that are included in codes. It also helps to explore codes and allows researchers to explain the processes they identify or suggest. So we go through, we understand codes and then we expand upon the processes that these codes explain or the codes identify or suggest. Then it also helps to connect categories and define how they fit into larger processes, which helps to further give a direction to sorting through data and retain focus in the study. So we write, we think about it, it aids reflection. Writing about something aids reflection, refinement and further evolution of whatever it is that we are dealing with. It also aids in linking analytic interpretation with empirical reality. So that is what memo writing does, and after that we move on to theoretical sampling. So we have written about our experiences. We have somehow come to a tentative definition of what kind of theory is emerging. What do we do next? We do theoretical sampling. Let's go and check whether our theory is really appropriate or not. And what do? The aim of theoretical sampling is to refine ideas not to increase the size of the original sample. So we have collected as much data as we needed to. Now we have to go and verify, we have to go and check whether whether the theory we think is emerging is really emerging or not. How do we do this? As categories emerge and evolve into theoretical constructs, researchers likely find gaps in their data and holes in their theories. So we find gaps, we say, okay, this theory is emerging, but hold on, something is missing here. I need to maybe explore more along this aspect. Maybe I need to give this a little bit more shape in order to connect these two parts or whatever it is that I'm talking about. Then they go back to the field and collect delimited data to fill those conceptual gaps and holes, and researchers then conduct theoretical sampling. So we take some information, we check, and then we say, okay, something is missing. We go back, we collect the information, and then we conduct theoretical sampling. Then we choose to sample specific issues. After that, we don't go in and sample the whole theory. We sample specific issues only, and researchers look for precise information to shed light on the emerging theory. So what is it that I'm talking about? Why am I talking about it? And that's when we actually go and find the information that can support whatever it is that we are talking about and explain it further. But that comes at the very end. Initially, we go back and forth and check whether we are going in the right direction or not. Have I understood this correctly? Yes or no? And then towards the very end, then we say, okay, this theory is emerging. Let me go and get some more evidence for it, or let me go and find something that can help me explain this much better. So we go in with a specific aim of finding the sample that helps us make whatever it is that we are saying more robust, more acceptable to the research community. Now, utility of theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling helps us to define the properties of our categories and to identify the gaps between them. So when we do theoretical sampling, we are able to understand what it is that our categories are really like, and we are also able to find gaps in them, to identify the contexts in which they are relevant. So theoretical sampling also helps us understand the situatedness of the categories. It also helps to specify the conditions under which they arise, are maintained and vary, and to discover how these categories then eventually explain the phenomenon or fit into the phenomenon. What do they do to the existing phenomenon once they are created? So they also helps to discover, the theoretical sampling helps to discover the consequences of the categories that have emerged. Some critical challenges to grounded theory are, the first challenge is that grounded theory limits entry into the worlds of our subjects and thus reduces understanding of their experience. People say that, you know, you're doing too much. By categorizing, you are drawing a boundary around an experience, you are reducing an experience, so the entry into the worlds of the subjects seems to be limited, and because the entry is limited, the understanding that could have come about as a result of not drawing categories, being open-minded and not drawing categories or drawing boundaries around the experience, will not come. Then the second critical challenge to grounded theory is that it curtails representation of both the social world and the subjective experience, and it relies upon the viewer's authority as an expert observer. This is one big criticism, this is one big limitation, one big challenge that grounded theory researchers face. And we assume that we know what we are seeing, that we are expert observers, that it relies upon the authority of the person, it relies upon the expertise of the person viewing the phenomenon, observing the phenomenon, to observe the phenomenon in its entirety. and it posits a set of objectivist procedures on which the analysis rests. So it's not really as open. That is what critics say, that it's not really as open and exploratory as it claims to be. But then these are some of the challenges that critical theorists, that grounded theory researchers deal with, and that is all we have time for in this lecture. So that sums up our discussion on grounded theory. Now this is just a very, very brief overview of grounded theory, but people who do grounded theory will tell you that a lot more is included in this concept of grounded theory. But the purpose of this class, the purpose of this course is not to give you details about every strategy. It's to introduce you to the existence of these strategies and then let you take, plant the seeds in your minds about knowing more about these strategies. So that's where we'll end our discussion. In the next class, we'll talk about some more strategies of qualitative research. Thank you very much for listening.